The wretchedness of the cross, the brutality and humiliation of it was somehow understood by the early Christians as the most sacred event in human history. And this is our story, a story that began with the human project run off the rails by our own selfish brokenness. All of us contribute in ways big and small to the awful state of the world. So for God to remove evil, we'd have to be uprooted with it, but God didn't want to do that. And so God, the artist, began to introduce symbols and symbolic acts to his people that communicated both the awful toll of evil and the incredible graciousness of God. These symbolic acts seem strange to the modern mind, but to ancient Israel, God allowing an animal to die in the place of guilty humans was a visceral, tactile symbol of death as the consequence of sin and of God's mercy in sacrificing something other than us to remove sin from our midst. As bizarre as it sounds now, a priest sprinkling the blood of an animal within the temple, blood that represented life, was a meaningful symbol of God's costly sacrificial love, as powerfully capable of removing, washing away evil and its consequences through death. And this was intended to shape the hearts and minds of God's people so that they might become a people of justice who cared for the poor and the oppressed, who demonstrated God's kingship and great love to the entire world. But people, time and time again, proved incapable of goodness. The decomposing human project waited for a promised king, a rescuer, to succeed in Israel's failure and to realize their long-abandoned task of enacting God's gracious kingship over the world. And so God, the artist, lover of profound symbols and powerfully demonstrative imagery, brings his story to a harrowing apex in Jesus, who takes up the mantle of Israel's long-awaited anointed king, but by serving rather than lording over others, and in the words of the prophet Isaiah, to give his life as a ransom for many, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. This is the sacrifice that demonstrates the destructive consequences of evil, the sacrifice that absorbs those consequences in order to rescue those who deserve to be destroyed by them, and instead destroy the powers of evil and darkness in the process. And this happened, the crucifixion of Jesus. And this continues to happen, the worship of the crucified criminal. Theologian Karl Barth wrote, "The passion of Jesus Christ, the unveiling of man's revelio and of God's wrath, yet also his mercy, did not take place in heaven or in some remote planet or even in some world of ideals. It took place in our time, in the center of world history in which our human life is played out. God has come into our life in its utter loneliness and frightfulness. We are not left alone in this frightful world. Into this alien land, God has come to us." The crucifixion of Jesus is not an unexpected tragedy. It's the lynchpin moment in the Bible's meta-narrative to which centuries of writing and prophetic wisdom had been pointing all along. For centuries, God had pledged to do something about the awful state of the world and the awful state of life in general in what we call the world. And in every step of this unfolding masterwork, with every layer of creative genius and cosmic profundity, the world overlooked what God was doing. It's not the kind of plan that we would have designed were it up to us. We would likely not have the king of the universe born in a manger, surrounded by manure and livestock, a king who came to serve rather than be served. We would never have dreamed of a crucified Messiah, a God who dies. But here we are. God's plan is so unlike ours because God is so unlike us. God is supreme, selfless, self-sacrificial love, and we are not. Howard Ross summarizes this perfectly. He said, "We are spared because God refuses to have us lost. Such is God's justice."